The intention of Natural Freedom League is to expand the understanding of natural law, which is based on objective morality, and to expose the illegitimacy of the belief in authority, and thus the inherent immorality of all government.
We be the Natural Freedom League, cause we become no longer unvegan. We seek in the wisdom, and that's why we did come to this prison, a prism. And that's why the beat thumps, and that's why we speak up. We be the Natural Freedom League, cause we become no longer unvegan. We seek in the wisdom, and that's why we did come to this prison, a prism. And that's why the beat thumps, and that's why we speak up. We be the
Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to the Natural Freedom League podcast. This is episode number 44. And I'm here once again with my producer and co-host, Chill Will Keller.
What's up, brother? How's it going?
It's going good.
Awesome.
Nice, brisk Sunday morning here in the Bay Area. I'm John Rowland. And today we have a special guest. Derrick Broze is a prolific researcher, activist, journalist, writer, author, speaker, and musician. He seems to have boundless energy and drive to do the great work of waking people up and providing us with alternative perspectives and solutions to the mainstream narrative. From the Conscious Resistance website, Derrick Broze. Welcome, my friend.
Hey, thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Right on.
Yeah, we appreciate you making time for us, man. We see you out there busy doing the work.
I know it's been a long time coming. I apologize, but I'm happy to be here with you guys finally.
Yeah,
That's
man.
good.
It's all good. You're fresh back from tour too. So
Yeah, I've been home for almost 2 weeks now. Just been sort of trying to balance. I've been telling everybody we're trying to balance relaxing and resting and getting back to the grind.
awesome. Yeah, it's all about balance. Love it.
Yeah.
So why don't we start off and have you tell us a little bit about your background and what experiences led you to doing the great work?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you guys for giving me a chance to share my work on your platform. So I know that today we're going to deal more specifically with like the spiritual aspect of my work, and my journalism is part of that too. But the story I'll share is one that I know you have heard, John, and I'll just share the kind of briefer version of it. Is that all of this really started for me when I was 20 years old. I got addicted to crystal meth, and I went to prison in 2005. Actually this month, back in 2005, so 17, 16, however many years ago. And it was really that experience when I got locked up, and then basically, having the experience of getting locked up and knowing that there's nobody that can help you. At first, when I got locked up for the first week or so, I was really like, okay, I can figure this out. There's a way around this. Like, I'm just going to sign for probation. I can get out of jail and I'll go home. My whole family will never know what happened, and I'll just deal with this. And, so I very much was kind of in this, like, I just want to get out of here and get back. And the universe creator had different plans for me. And I kind of was asking for something different. I don't know if I shared this, but prior to getting locked up, about 2 weeks or so before I got locked up, I was actually, I'd just been going through so much trauma. I wasn't addicted to crystal anymore. I'd got myself sober for about a month before I got locked up, but I was still very much like in that world, and, just really starting to realize I needed to change people, places, and things and all that stuff. And I just was losing it, man. I remember after I left the crack house and the meth house and came back to my parents' house, said, please let me come stay with you so I can get my, my shit together. They obliged and let me come home. And I just was still kind of in a nuts place. And I remember my mom came into the room I was staying in at their house, and I was like in the closet, just sort of on my knees, like in tears and just like crying. And she's just like, what's going on, son? Like, how can I help you? Please tell me what to do, And I remember telling her, like, it feels like I need a pause. Like, everything is just going too fast. Like, I can't breathe. I can't figure out, obviously, like, being on drugs for the prior 2 years and on all kinds of hard drugs had really just kind of messed with my head for a while. And so I was just having trouble focusing and really making heads or tails of what was going on. I was also dealing with a lot of depression and, suicidal tendencies and things of that sort. So I had actually asked, like, I need a pause. I need things to slow down. And then 2 weeks later, I get arrested and go to prison. And it wasn't really exactly the way I was hoping or expecting, but it was really that experience, the first, that when I got locked up, realized I wasn't going to go home, realized that no matter, once my family found out about it, they tried to get a lawyer and see if they could do this or that. And none of it was going to work. The judge was like, no, you need to sit in jail. And I was looking at the calendar, and it was at least going to be the soonest I would be getting home would be 11 months from the point I was getting, when I got sentenced. So I realized, like, okay, there's really nothing I can do. I can sit all day over on the phone and rack up phone bills, calling my girlfriend or lawyer or mom or whatever, and crying and bitching about it. I can be angry. I can, blame other people, but ultimately I have to sit here. I have to live it. I'm going to have to sit here and be in this place. And it was one of the most, I think it has the possibility, depending on the type of person, to be one of the most disempowering experiences, but also can be a very empowering experience, because that's where you can find your strength when you feel like you hit the bottom, or where you feel like you have nothing left. It's like, all right, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to figure this out. I have to, live these 24 hours every day in this cage and figure out what I'm going to do when I get out of here, and just how can I make sure I don't come back here, and all these kinds of things. And so, yeah, that began like a sort of 3-year period. I got locked up late 2005, got out October 2006, and then was kind of out for 5 months, went back for another 3, out for a year, went back for another 4, and by October 2008 I was being released as a felon for like the final time. And it was in that kind of 2.5 year period of getting locked up where I discovered meditation. I started doing journaling, started doing a lot of introspection, and generally just started shifting the way I was thinking about life. Like I said, I got out for a year, and I came out very much determined to, like, I'm never doing that again. I also have a family on both sides of my family, my father's and my mother's, that are very kind of drug use and alcohol abuse, and prison is very prominent. And my birth father actually just died 3 years ago from his drug addiction. He overdosed in a hotel in Houston. And, after battling it his whole life, and me going to visit him in prison. So it was just like, I don't want to do this. I know what this looks like. That's the family tradition. I'm going to try to do something different. And when I got out, I was very much determined to, like, break that cycle. But it's kind of cheesy. And I think even some of the 12-step stuff that people teach, I don't really practice 12-step. It's just not really for me, but I know it helps some people. But one of the things that is accurate they talk about is the idea of changing your people, places, and things. And basically, like, you can't go back to the crack house if you're trying to quit crack. Like, you can, like, go back to the bar with your friends if you're trying to quit drinking, those sort of things. And I was still trying to hold on to older acquaintances that I believed were friends, and that I would soon come to realize were not friends, because they would say things like, I'm really getting sick of your optimism. Like, why are you so positive these days? Because I was starting to just feel good about life, feel good about myself for the first time ever in my 20 something years of being around. I just hadn't even felt good. I'd been depressed for so long. I'd been a lot of self-hatred and all this stuff that I was starting to work through and really starting to heal from. And I was enjoying the sunsets, and I was enjoying, just being alive. I was remembering that I like to learn, and just all this stuff. And I was starting to go different ways from friends. But before I did that, I was still hanging around some of them when I got out after the first year. And yeah, I mean, sooner or later, I started smoking weed again, and I have no problem with cannabis, but I was on papers at the time. And so, of course, I pissed dirty, and then, they send you back. And, it was people that I thought cared about me. And I think in their own ways, from where they were at that time, they did care, and they were trying to use the best tools they had. But there's one situations where I ran into an old friend who was like, man, I know you just got out of prison. I know you're trying to get back on your feet. So I really want to help you out. You want to start selling weed for me? Like, you can make a good amount of money and this and that. And I was like, man, I'm really trying to stay out of this, this time. I don't want to get back into everything. And he's like, how about, man, come on, I'll front you a pound of weed. Like, you just go ahead, pay me back whenever you get time, and you'll make a good amount of money. I'm like, no, really, man. Like, how about 2 pounds? It's like, dude, I appreciate it, but I really, by the time he said 4 pounds, I'm loading them up in the back of the car, and it's just like, yeah. So I mean, sooner or later, I'm smoking weed, I'm around everything, and I end up getting dirty and then going back. So like, it took me a little bit to really figure it out. I didn't get it even after being locked up for a year. I still didn't figure it out. And I always like to kind of make sure I say this when I tell this story, that the prison system didn't save me in any regard in any way at all. Like those places are horrible. They're not about rehabilitation. There's so many good people wasting away in those places that I met, you know, young and old, brilliant people for nonviolent victimless crimes. You know, and there are some people who are super disturbed, who don't give a damn about your non-aggression principle or your sovereignty or any of that, and are just dealing with their own trauma. But it's all trauma, right? And those places, in many cases, just reinforce more trauma. They don't really typically help people through trauma. You have to make a choice. And I made a choice. I made a choice that I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life doing that. And those experiences absolutely shaped what became the conscious resistance and all of my work today, you know, because I didn't know anything really about the government or natural law or conspiracies or any of that stuff back then. I mean, I'd been reading about like UFOs and weird stuff like that, since supernatural stuff, since I was a little kid. I was kind of already open-minded and I didn't really trust the government, but I couldn't tell you what the Federal Reserve was in 2005 or 2008 even. It wasn't until I got out of prison and then in late 2009 started doing research and discovered all this stuff, and you know, watched a documentary, read a book, heard Ron Paul speak, and one thing led to this, to that, and that kind of started my activism and then eventually journalism journey. But I really feel like without the prior experience of getting locked up, going to prison, having those whole things, that I wouldn't, I mean, I don't know, maybe everything works out in the end either way, right? But I feel like I had to go through that to be able to share the things that I'm able to share now. So I hope that answered your question.
Dude, that's completely empowering, man. That's awesome. I can relate to that on many levels. Living the fast life in the music industry with addiction, and then the birth of my daughter. And what it did is I bottomed out, and it forced me to look in the mirror. And you know, from there, I was curious on what made me tick and the psychology about how I, you know, stumbled and found my place in these bad situations. And that's where my spiritual journey started as well. Just asking those questions, those basic questions about how do I operate? How does my psyche operate in reality? And so I can completely relate on that. And, you know, one thing that I've learned too is that the universe will test you, right? To see if you learn the lesson and how much you care about it. How much do you want whatever you're trying to accomplish? And so, of course, you know, I went through many trials and tribulations, but here we are. So, the great story, Derrick.
Hey, that's beautiful to hear, brother. Congrats for you as well.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, I can also relate to that story. Definitely had my experiences with experimenting. And I remember at an early age, probably like my early 20s, like kind of understanding that, you know, you aren't actually an addict until you kind of admit you are and give in to that. And I always thought, like, as long as you have in mind that you're going to get away from that at some point, it's weird how admitting that you're an addict and starting to claim that it's like a disease is sort of a cop-out. I feel like you're giving away your free will to make the decision to stop. And I think that our society kind of preys on that a little bit, on people who, you know, don't feel like they can quit, and so they can just say, "Oh, it's a genetic thing," or it's a disease, right? And they don't,
Yeah.
they aren't empowered with the idea that they can overcome this themselves, you know?
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I 100% agree, man. I think that, I mean, again, like every body, every mind is different. People handle things in their own way, and I'll respect that. But I definitely have never liked, because I mean, going into these places, so for example, the first place I got to was a prison by all intents and purposes, razor wire, you can't leave, armed guards, all that kinds of things, right? But they were able to call it a rehab facility, and I mean, it's this whole, I learned so much even back then. This was probably what sprinkled some of the seeds of my later activism, is I was learning while I was in there how corrupt that system was, like how the judge that sent me to this particular place gets a certain amount of money for every person she sends there, even people who don't have any drug addictions. Like, okay, well, you stole something, go to this rehabilitation facility. And they call it like behavioral management or whatever. It's somewhat kind of attempted at brainwashing in some ways, but it's, again, like you see a counselor once a week, and so they get to call it a rehabilitation facility, and they get all kinds of state money for it. But other than that, you're in a prison, you know, and you're in the bunk, and everything else is the same. But once a week, you see these counselors who, some of them seem to care, some of them you could tell just stopped caring a long time ago. But yeah, I never liked all the propaganda and the messaging that was put through there when they would try to talk to us about these things, like that this is something you're going to deal with for the rest of your life. You're an addict this way. It's a disease. You can't get rid of it, right? Like, so accept it. And, you know, again, I don't like to tell other people how to live their lives, but I definitely think that that can be an excuse. And I saw that in my father's life, that he definitely clearly had a lot of emotional, deep trauma going back to his childhood, and like it's generational. Like my great grandfather hung himself in prison. My grandfather was on drugs, got my dad on drugs when he was 10 years old, you know, and then like it just was going on and on and on. It was part of the culture. And then he gets told that like it's a disease within him that is something he's never going to be able to get rid of. And I think for some people that does allow them to sort of just make excuses. And again, like I hate to like I don't like to tell other people how to live their lives, obviously, but I do think there's a lot of that in our society where somebody plants a seed in your head that like this is just the way you are. I saw this a lot too with just the, you know, things around being bipolar, for example, right? Like I definitely hung around a lot of people who were dealing with a lot of trauma. We were all using drugs, and I could see how even my younger self, how we sort of like thrived off knowing that there was something wrong with us in these weird ways. Like, oh yeah, I'm bipolar, so this is why I'm this crazy, or I'm this thing, and you know, it's why I have all this trauma. And like, and it kind of keeps you, which I think was your point, from like actually looking at the deeper things of like, well, why might this happen? Well, I don't know. It's just a disease I have, so I can take medicine and it'll make me better, or I can just, well, I'm sorry, I'm bipolar. You know, it's just what I am.
Oh, you're muted.
Whoops, did I get muted? Sorry.
You got it. Cool.
But yeah, you know, I think it just is a way for people to make excuses and kind of diminish their own responsibility. And society kind of plays into that. And obviously we know there's this whole paradigm that feeds into like, yeah, you do have a disease, just take medicine for it, take pills for it, and it'll get fixed, or see a psychiatrist for the rest of your life. And again, not say that, because I'm sure someone's like, hey, I need this medicine, otherwise I'll go crazy or whatever. It's like, I don't know your particular situation, but I do believe the more we sort of let go of that paradigm and start looking deeper at our own traumas, which is the whole thing of what the conscious resistance is about, because I had those experiences and I realized prison wasn't going to fix me, medicine wasn't going to fix me, you know. Even just one other brief thing I'll say is like back in the day because before I ever got into drugs, I was hurting myself. I've got these pretty wicked stitches right here from really messing up my arm one good time, and I kind of blacked out when I did it. I just found this huge knife and went like whack, whack, and my buddy had to save me and take me to the hospital, and I'm bleeding all over the place. And and thankfully I had a friend who just knew I was going through some stuff, but it was still my friend and helped me out. But when I went there, they wanted to put me in like a psychiatric hospital, and I lied my way out of it. I was like, no, we were just playing with knives and he accidentally cut me, or whatever. And they could clearly tell this was like a self-inflicted wound. But and they got me to admit, okay, like I did this to myself. And then they're like, okay, now that you admitted that, you can't leave for 24 hours or whatever until we evaluate you. And I was going through a lot of stuff, and I just said whatever I needed to say to get out of that situation. The last thing I wanted to do is be locked in some psychiatric hospital. But my point is, those are the kind of solutions they come at you with, is like, hey, we're going to take you away somewhere from your family and friends and all the things that might make you feel comfortable while you're going through this hard time, and probably load you up with medicine, and that'll make you feel better, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Culture definitely promotes. They try to instill and promote the victim mentality, right? So you have internal confusion, and then what do you do from there? You look externally for answers or control, and that's where we get the state and all these other institutions, and so it can be a vicious cycle.
Yeah, it fits that pharmaceutical paradigm, that they want us to believe that a pill can fix everything. Take Chantix to quit smoking. Now that's causing us cancer too. What does it mean to be conscious?
That's a good question. I think that for me, just the general definition I would give is just, and obviously, well, let's look at it a couple layers, right? Conscious dictionary definition, generally speaking, is, something that has like awareness, right? If we're conscious, we're awake. And I don't mean in the wake of terms of conspiracies, but like we're awake. We're like, okay, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm talking, I'm breathing, I'm a conscious being, right? I think that applies to humans, obviously, animals and plants and all kinds of forms of life. And then in terms of like in a deeper way, I guess, and the way I tend to use it, and particularly in terms of the conscious resistance and the conscious agora, my community project and stuff like that. I think what I was aiming for with implementing that, bringing that word into the conversation in terms of activism, is somebody who, yes, you're a living, breathing human being like most of us. Although there's this song lyric I really like from Killswitch Engage from back in the day that used to say like, "Are you alive or just breathing?" Right? Sometimes I wonder that about some people, right? Like, are we really conscious or are we just breathing, right? But to me, it means somebody who is conscious, is consciously aware of themselves. Doesn't mean you're a perfect person, but you're aware of your flaws, your doubts, your fears, insecurities, as much as your goals, motivations, and your, positive things about yourself. You're aware of the people around you. You're aware of the world generally around you. And obviously, I'm meaning in the ways that people in our communities are, like the deeper truths, the deeper messages, right? Kind of consciously searching for those types of answers and those things. That's to me what it means, right? Because again, you can be a living, breathing human being walking around, and we have words for them: sheeple, zombie, whatever. I don't really use those terms too often, but you know what I mean? Like somebody who's just going through the motions. That would be something that I would say is opposed to what we're talking about in terms of being conscious.
Yeah, good definition. I like that. I like how Mark Passio puts it too. It's simply pattern recognition, the ability of a being to recognize patterns within oneself and the environment around us. And if we're trying to accomplish and reach higher consciousness, which is higher pattern recognition, we need to be able to recognize more patterns more frequently. And how we do that is taking in information. The question is what type of information. So, yeah, that's good.
So how do you keep your consciousness raised?
I think that for me, I have a variety of methods. Obviously, I mentioned meditation. I mean, I wish I could sit here and say today that I meditate as much as I did when I started. It's something I aim to on a daily and weekly basis. And since being home on tour, it's been a good time to like, okay, I'm back home now. Let's restart some of the patterns and the goals that I have, right? And so back to hitting the gym a couple times a week. That's something that really helps me. It's a type of meditation for me, just being active in that way. Doing yoga a couple times a week, just because after being on my ass driving for 2 months, I feel pretty tight in a lot of places, right? It's not a feeling I like. Those kinds of things, as well as like diet. I am a vegan. I don't try to force that on anybody, of course, but to me, whether veganism or not, like eating whole foods, like good whole foods, organic, like including that in your meal, getting, if you like to supplement or get vitamins or nutrients or just get it through the food you're eating, trying to get as close to farm earth to my plate as possible, right? Those are things that are really important to me, as well as like the spiritual development. And I think ultimately, like what I've really focused on the last couple years is kind of what I was saying earlier in the conversation about balancing. I've been doing this being activism, and then starting to write in 2012. And I'd say I started to take it real seriously like 2014, 15, like, hey, this is something I want to focus on forever. That I've come so close to burning out so many times over the years, like especially in the early years. Like if I didn't find balance in some of those times, I would have quit before anybody even got to know my work, because I was just so hardcore about it. It was just obsessive, like I think a lot of us are when we first start waking up, right? I was also, I was just kind of, again, getting out of prison. I didn't really have many possessions. I didn't have a computer. I didn't have any of that. I was go to the library every day and just research for like 10, 12 hours a day, and just post articles on my Facebook page, and just, starting a blog and doing all that kind of stuff. And even doing that, then I was organizing protests, and then I was going to meditation groups, and then I was having a girlfriend, and I was doing, all this stuff. And I would get to the point of like, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I'm tired. I'm sick, and just whatever. Or I would physically get sick from just ignoring my health, and kind of, it was like yo-yoing back and forth, being like, all right, I'm doing really good, taking care of my mental, physical, spiritual health. Okay, now I'm ignoring those things, and I'm just going so hard on the physical. Oh God, I'm drained. Okay, take a break. And it just took a few years to kind of find that balance. And now I feel like I do a pretty good job of that. I mean, I work 7 days a week in different ways, whether that's just like, okay, answering emails today or doing interviews or whatever. But I also go on hikes. I go on like walks with Miriam whenever we just want to go walk and talk. We have community, that we try to be around other people and just have that human connection as well. Go out and like see the sunset early in the morning, or sunrise early in the morning, or the sunset in the evening. Different things like that to me have become so important to just, especially with COVID 1984, just to remember like what it is we're fighting for. What is, like, for me, it's important to hold the vision and know what I'm aiming for, what the better world I want to experience looks like. And part of that is finding balance. Like, you know, I love doing the work, writing articles, doing investigations. Like it gets me high. Like I love it. It's just something I love to do. But I also like putting it away and just, you know, vegging out with Miriam and watching a movie or reading a book, or just, like I said, going on a walk or going on a hike in the beautiful area we live in. And things like that, I feel like help keep my vibration high and keep me kind of on a balanced state of mind. Because other than, like, if it wasn't for those things, and whenever I feel myself getting like slightly aggravated, I'm just like, all right, I'm spending too much time doing this right now. I'm getting annoyed because people are asking me questions and I'm like, leave me alone, I don't want to talk to you, right? And it's like, okay, that's usually a sign that I've probably been on the computer too much today, or this week, or whatever the case may be, and I need to step away and take a couple days off from like intensive things. And so, yeah, I mean, there's stuff like that. And then, you know, on the deeper kind of, as far as spiritual practices that I think might be interesting to this audience, there was an experience I did years ago that was really instrumental in helping me. I mean, a lot of meditation, like I said, kind of self-individual meditation. Also, psychedelics played a large role in my past as well. And I mean, those are, I think that my experiences with psychedelics were trying to warn me of what I was doing with crystal, and saying like, hey, you're headed down this, you know, dark road. I have a super long, intense story I'll tell you guys one day about, you know, taking an acid trip 2 months before I got arrested, which showed me exactly what was going to happen. And I just kind of ignored it. I wasn't ready to listen yet. But I had, you know, those types of experiences, ayahuasca, DMT, some of those things definitely, in the simplest ways, helped me see, hey, there's something much bigger than me out there. I'm just a little speck of dust right here, and I'm going to respect that. And I'm not sure what it is out there or who it is that's, you know, sending these messages, but I know there's something much bigger than me. And that, of course, is empowering. And I think helpful for people to kind of knock that ego down a little bit and realize, like, okay, maybe I'm not the top of everything that I thought. But there was this other experience I had called body electronics back in 2012. And it's pretty interesting. There's a whole book on it. The guy's named Robert Louis Stevenson, I think, something like that. But if you look up body electronics, you can find more info. And pretty much just like, he's not the first person to propose this, but he kind of talks about the idea of the human body as an operating system. And that, you know, we take on programs and upload programs that can be negative, you know, negative self-talk, all that kind of thing. And then even more specifically, they have like this whole modality of like the body, the human body. So they map out, I think everything on the left side they associate with feminine, right side masculine. If I can't remember exactly, but so they have things like that, and then different aspects of your body associate with different relationships in your life. It's a really interesting kind of modality, and I didn't know much about it. But at the time, again, I was just a couple years out of prison. I was very much in my healing phase. I'd just done ayahuasca. I was doing a lot of meditations, and I had just told myself, you know what? I'm going to do all this stuff, even if it seems weird, hippie, whatever. I don't even know if it's real. I'm going to just open myself to these things and see what works and what doesn't, and come in everything with an open mind. And that's kind of how I approached that situation. A buddy invited me. He said, we're hosting a session of body electronics. It's super healing. I think that you really, you know, we want you to heal in this way. Like a lot of people, because of my work, support me in that way, and they want to help me along on my healing journey, you know, to help me be stronger. And that's always been really kind. And so they invited me over. And essentially what it is, you like lay on a table, like a big massage table, and you've got people standing around you. In the group that I did, it was maybe 4 or 5 people around me. And then my buddy was like the guide who's kind of guiding me through this. And you just lay down. And basically what they start doing is they hold pressure points on you, like pressure points in your hands and different parts of your body. And what they say is that like the whole thing behind body electronics is that different traumas in our life, different negative programs get stored in our body, and they calcify and they become crystallizations, which can lead to cancer as well as like physical and mental trauma. And the idea with body electronics is they're like, we hold these pressure points on you and you start to feel hot. Like, and maybe it's just because people are squeezing on you or whatever it is, like you definitely start to feel hot. And so they tell you when you start to feel a hot or burning sensation, tell us where it's at on your body. And then that's where they associate, okay, that part of the body is this relationship. And then it leads to kind of questions. And then the idea is it can unravel and reveal some truths and some healing, and it absolutely worked for me. I mean, they're doing the pressure points. I start feeling like this burning in my chest. I can't remember which side, but it was the side related to father relationship, and that's very clearly where a lot of my trauma has come from. And so it's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And it was pretty crazy. Like, as they're holding these pressure points, I'm just breathing. So he starts asking, okay, so tell me about the relationship with your father, right? And I'm kind of, telling him a few things. And then he's like, I want you to go back in your past and share a memory with us. And this memory came up that I guess I'd been suppressing or ignoring. And it was a memory of being 7 years old, being in my little baseball uniform in my garage. And I clearly remember seeing my mom coming out of the garage, and she's like, we got to go. And I was like, wait a few more minutes. And I figured out, like, my dad was supposed to be there that day for this game, and he never showed up. He went back to prison. And I was kind of experiencing this memory, and he's like, okay, so tell us about the memory. And I'm like, okay, I'm 7, I'm in the garage. He's like, no. Don't describe the memory to us, relive it and share that with us. And so again, I'm like, okay, I don't know any of these people. I'm just going to close my eyes and go into this thing. And I just started kind of experiencing that memory. And it was so crazy. It was so healing. I mean, I was in tears as I'm like experiencing it and sharing it. I could hear everybody else was in tears. But I was feeling this weight just come off me, man. It was so amazing. And then the last thing he did, kind of as it was wrapping up, as I was reliving this memory, was have me go back and speak to the 7-year-old Derrick, which, is part of that kind of connecting and healing with the inner child, which has been absolutely instrumental. And this is something I talk about in the Conscious Resistance trilogy. And yeah, I mean, I was able to just talk to a 7-year-old Derrick and say, you are going to go through so much pain and so much trauma, but it's going to make you so strong. Like, please, man, it almost makes me cry thinking about it. Like, it was just so powerful, dude. For me, like, it felt like what I've heard some people refer to as timeline healing. It's like I was being healed in this moment as 20-something, whatever-year-old Derrick, but 7-year-old Derrick was also like getting the message, and it was kind of reverberating through my timeline, if that makes any sense. And yeah, man, that was, so I've done different things like that. I'm just pretty open to getting that healing. And like I said, my sort of unsolicited advice to anybody who's curious about these things, but also skeptical, is if you're going to bother with them, go in with an open mind. Like, just put all your ego, all that stuff aside, and just say, like, hey, all right, I'm here. Let me get what the experience is going to offer. And then you take what works for you and leave the rest.
Man, that's awesome. You just answered a question that I've had for years. I had a DMT trip where I relived a near-death experience that I had when I was 9. And I was, at the time I was 37. So I relived the experience as a 37-year-old to kind of just heal that trauma. And it was such a mind-blowing experience. And timeline healing, that's, that's like the best thing I can, describe it on what it was. Going back in time and healing that childhood trauma. So that's great. And spirituality, it's almost like the art of living wisely, and that could be basic. There's so many layers to that, right? But it comes down to spiritual. You have ritual in spiritual, so your daily habits. So it's so good to strike that balance. What if you're on the grind for so hard? For me, it's being in my garden. That's a meditation for me, right? I zone out. I'm into the plants, and just developing that relationship. Full meditation. I love it. So it's good to first know what that is for oneself, and and activate that and harness that almost on a daily basis or often.
Yeah, I love being in the garden for sure.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, and I wanted to say that, with the substance use, there's obviously a consciousness aspect to, using substances, and just like anything else, it can be a tool to help you raise your consciousness, but then when it's abused, it can harm you as well, and it can limit you and hold you back. So I think there's something to the fact that we've all of us have experimented with drugs on some level, and have, to me, all of them had an aspect of raising your consciousness. Even drugs like crystal meth, it's a different energy, but it definitely, for me, every one that I tried was had some aspect of raising consciousness, or at least altering your consciousness and getting you to consider those things. And I also think I wanted to talk about the idea of coming to terms with death. And I think that a lot of those experiences can sort of facilitate that for you if you've never had a near-death experience yourself, or maybe you've never dealt with people dying in your family really close to you or anything like that. That, you know, those substances can kind of facilitate that for you and kind of give you a glimpse into, you know, a world beyond the physical world, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's like in those altered states, there are opportunities for finding truth, and as you said, like they can all be abused. I've had the wonderful opportunity to both abuse and use these different substances, right? Including acid, including, I mean, so I don't really talk about this too often, but I used to sell acid a whole lot, like a lot of acid. And that was that was both before and after I was addicted to crystal, because I kind of view psychedelics on a whole different level from the rest of them. And it was more like I enjoyed gifting people these things and helping people who were after those experiences, kind of being the conduit for them and helping them get good quality LSD whenever possible. And it was actually in 2012, once I started to do my activism and I was going to places and the cops started calling me by my first name just out in public, I was like, I'm going to stop doing that now because I don't want to make myself an easier target than I already am. But I had so many experiences over the years, again, both before I got like hard into drugs, where I was just like, I don't know what's happening here, but this is definitely like something I want to explore. And I did go down those rabbit holes of taking 10 or 15 hits of acid and trying to figure out if the key to enlightenment was somewhere on the other side, right? And you know, I think there's bits and pieces of truth in there. There's also lots of chaos and confusion. And every time you kind of come up, you're like, oh, I almost had it, but now it's fading. And oh, maybe next time. And yeah, I mean, I think that those experiences absolutely shaped who I am today as well. I mean, sometimes I tell people like 3 things made me who I am today, and that is acid, getting arrested and going to prison, and you know, kind of activism, starting on this path. Like that all shaped everything here. And to the point of kind of death, yeah, I mean, I think that I'm sure I have all the logical fears of death like inside me as a human being. You know, if something scary happens, I'll probably like, you know, try to defend myself or whatever, right? I don't just walk blindly into it. But I also have no daily fears or kind of, you know, existential fear of death or anything like that, really. And I do believe a lot of it was psychedelics and some of the things that I've went through that have just kind of altered my perception of like feeling like my physical body dying is going to be the end of my experience or whatever, right? You know, I definitely am open to and tend to believe in things like reincarnation and some of those aspects, and just kind of generally that the energy that is contained within this physical vessel is more than just whatever, you know, my physical body ends up being here on this planet. So yeah, and I definitely think my mind has been opened broadly because of drugs generally, but definitely psychedelics. And like you said, I mean, they all alter your state of mind. And in those altered states of mind, sometimes just looking at things from a new perspective can set you on a new path. I mean, that's kind of one of the things I always enjoyed about when I was, I believe, respectfully and correctly using acid and mushrooms and things like that, is if I was facing a problem or a situation that I just couldn't wrap my mind around, I would have a night with just myself at home and some chill music in the dark and just like meditating while tripping and just like really trying to figure this situation out and work and let whatever answers and, you know, have a fun time with it too, but with like a very specific goal in mind and a purpose in mind. So I definitely see the value in those experiences. And then it's interesting too that like over time, the lesson that I received, the message I received was, you don't need me anymore. And I stopped tripping so much, you know, like I like knowing that I have access to mushrooms and LSD if I want to have a trip some night, and I have my collection of those sorts of things. But it's very, very rare that I feel inclined to anymore. You know, I love and respect and have all these great memories and stuff, but I'm definitely not driving on acid anymore. I'm definitely not like dosing 10, 15 hits of acid anymore. And I'm not even really taking a couple too much anymore. It's really like a rare occasion with just like me and Miriam or some friends or something, and we just get together and have a good time. But it is very rare because I felt like after all those experiences, all the lessons was like, hey, you don't need me to find the truth. That was like the final ultimate revealing is like, You don't need this substance to find the truth. I helped show you some things, but now you're good. Go on your own journey, and I'll be here if you need me.
Yeah, for sure, man. I got that same message, and it's been a while, and it was very apparent. The work is done in the here and now, and it is. I use psychedelics as well as to get that different perspective, like you were saying, and that's definitely helped in my life. Me myself being a student of occultism and esoteric knowledge. I'm a student of life, but I'm also a student of death. And, with the current climate on how things are going, you can see that a lot of people are scared of getting sick, dying. They think it's the end. They just have that lack of knowledge of self and nature, right? Death isn't the end. It's, maybe the end of a cycle, but there's definitely, there's the next transition for sure. We can see this in nature, in the natural world, and that applies to, to humans as well. So that's the primal fear, right? The fear of death, and the fear of the unknown. That's where all ignorance comes from. It's the unknowing, and when you don't know something, you're easily manipulated and controlled. So definitely comes to self-knowledge, and death is one of those categories that's good to look into and contemplate.
Yeah, I definitely feel what you're saying about getting to that point where you realize you don't need it anymore. But I'll tell you what, cannabis still has something to teach me. All right.
I'm right there with you on that.
Yeah. So how does the historical and conspiracy research overlap with the research or the search for spiritual truth?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, it's been, I'll say, like, just to my specific strategic efforts, right? Because everything I do, I tend to do very much with like a meticulous kind of plan and thought in mind. Okay, this is going to lead to this next thing, and I'm going to launch this thing. And how can I get this person thinking about this and then show them this thing, right? And so my journalistic work, the documentaries, the articles, video reports, et cetera, are sort of aimed at the people who maybe haven't found their way into the communities that we already exist, right? They're, the people who kind of know this stuff. Hopefully I'm providing some valuable new information, like, wow, okay, I just learned something from reading Derrick's article or watching this video or whatever. But really, that's kind of my effort to reach me 15 years ago, right? Like the people who are just beginning their journey and who maybe don't know that big pharma is corrupt, or who maybe don't know that these different influences come from the oil industry or whatever the case may be. And through that, pull them into like this nexus that we have of all this alternative media, my work, other people's works, get them questioning. And what I found is, like, you can wake up to the political things, conspiracies, et cetera. And at some point, most people, okay, I get it. I've watched everything. I've read everything. I've heard it all. Like, but what are we going to do, right? What's the real solution here? And that's kind of where my philosophical and spiritual work, things like talking about freedom cells, as well as personal, mental, spiritual health, comes in, right? Because I'm trying to like draw them in, like, here's the problem. Hopefully this is alarming to you and concerning to you. Now come in, now let's have a conversation. Okay, now here's some things we can do about it, right? And so, I mean, I feel like I can't ever, as an individual, give up on people in the sense of stop doing journalism. For me, it's just still, it's something I love to do, for one, but also I feel like there's still too many people in the matrix that we need to help free those minds and kind of help them on their journey, right? Not that I or any of us have like the path for them, but to be the little seed that gets planted that starts them on their own path, because sometimes it can just be one thing you say, whether you're on the internet or not, just a conversation you have with somebody at the grocery store, right? It plants a seed in their head. You have no idea where that goes, what journey they begin on after that, right? So I still feel like a lot of my efforts are aimed at helping free those minds from the matrix. And then at the same time, as they start that journey, hey, here's a whole, slew of information that I've done and people like yourselves and others are doing about consciousness, about, the occult, about some of these deeper teachings and deeper meanings that are also a big part of what we're doing, right? Because if there's any way to encapsulate like what the conscious resistance is, it's this phrase from the first book of the trilogy I have on some of our shirts. It just says, revolution without healing is a recipe for disaster. And that's kind of what I really base my work around is like, look, we can wake up to what they're doing, but if we just go out there and let's overthrow them and put ourselves in control when we still got our egos and flaws and traumas and stuff to be worked through, I think it's only going to be 1 to 2 generations, if that long, before we cycle back and create the same things. We will inevitably create and become the same monsters that we've been fighting if we don't forego that, revolution, right? Revolving, that's the key word, going in circles. If we don't forego that attempt to just continue in that cycle and say we're going to break free from that, yes, let's be informed about what's going on in the physical realm. That has a place, because some folks in the spiritual occult kind of community, I think, sometimes lose their footing on the ground, and they're all like up here, they're all elevated up there, and they forget like the physical, the material that also has a place, and that also does matter, right? If we just meditate all day or just study occult wisdom all day, our body's going to shrivel up from not eating, right? Just simple things like that. We have to find that balance again. And so for me, it is important to confront the physical institutions of power and to have awareness of that as much as it is to drive people to these bigger, deeper questionings and helping them understand that, like, honestly, everything I've been doing for the last 12 years has just been manifesting. And I've just gotten better and better and better at it, right? And I think that's all they're doing too. They're using their mass media, their propaganda to manifest the world that they want and to get us to co-create that world with them. And some people don't even realize they're helping them manifest their vision. And like you guys were saying about the fear, a lot of people buy into the fear. Sometimes that's all they want us to do is feel fear so that we can create that fear balance, which they seem to enjoy or thrive off of. And so, yeah, to me, it's like, it's so important to understand the physical as well as that spiritual, that occult knowledge and search for meaning, which I think is what we're all on, right? We're studying old books and old texts and speeches and from people before us, trying to understand, is there wisdom that I can gain from these, older traditions that is going to be valuable to me in my life at this present moment? And if so, how do I incorporate that into my daily rituals, as you were talking about, Will? And, I think it's all important to me. Like I can't ignore the physical any more than I could ignore the spiritual.
Yeah, man. And that's why I love your work, dude. It's a holistic approach. If you want to dive deeper in with self-healing or just go deeper in occult knowledge, you have that there. And what I love is that you're making content for for somebody that's just starting to wake up or interested or has that notion that something's wrong. Like the Pyramid of Power series, phenomenal series for someone that's just getting into that type of awareness to, hey, start there, work your way up. And like you said, it's planting those seeds. And that's so important. Anybody that wants to, go public and create content, remember, you could do content for the community. That's great. But we need to, focus on the people. We need to bring those people in and clear a path, just the way shower for the beginning. Ultimately, they have to do the work. But we can at least, hold the torch over the starting point and plant those seeds. Yeah, that's great.
Awesome, brother. I appreciate that. And by the way, we just released, literally right before I did this, we're doing this interview, episode 8 of chapter 8 of the Pyramid of Power. So if anybody wants to check that out, thepyramidofpower.net.
Nice.
Yeah, in terms of reaching people who are resisting consciousness, I thought it's kind of interesting. Your name kind of has a double entendre to it, right? It's the conscious resistance, but it's also reaching the people who are resisting the consciousness, right?
I'm glad you caught that. Yeah.
I think that you're we started out, Natural Freedom League started out with me going out on a corner in my hometown with signs that were saying, like, know your natural law rights, and teaching these concepts to people. And inevitably, when people come talk to us, it always gets into so you're a Q guy, and you believe, Q like hijacked all the conspiracies, and so you have to get into that conversation. And we really used a lot of your work early on because we were dealing with a lot of the election talk, and you were doing really good work on how they were running drills on what was going to happen at the election, right? And you predicted everything that was going to happen. And they were telling us, it was all in the news, but not many people were reporting on it. But we definitely had that section. We call it the agenda against natural law. and we used
That's awesome.
a lot of your work to show, what these people are doing and how it operates. And it's not hidden, it's all out there, but people need
Yeah.
to get off of mainstream media and look for alternative sources like yourself, Whitney Webb, James Corbett. You guys are all doing amazing work. And
Thank
speaking
you,
of
brother.
that, your books really get into the technocracy, which really is, what the New World Order is. What is the relationship between the technocrats and consciousness?
Yeah, that's a good one there, because right, technocracy, for anybody who's kind of not sure about that definition, I'll just give a brief definition. I mean, it's a political philosophy that was more popular in the early 1900s, or at least that's kind of, you look up Wikipedia, it'll say it was like a political philosophy that had its heyday in the early 1900s, and it, lost favor and it disappeared and nobody cares about it anymore. But it very much seems to be the guiding philosophy of everything we're seeing today. And it essentially says that rather than democracy, which is, ruled by people in its best form, obviously, I think most of us see the flaws in that system, but rather than democracy or monarchy or just a dictatorship, you should have a technocracy, which would be ruled by the technocrats, the technological elite, the scientific experts, etc. So get the best, brightest among us, specifically those who are building technological tools to guide philosophy, because clearly they're just so wise and care about us. And yeah, it was very popular. People like Elon Musk's grandfather were involved in the Social Credit Party back in Canada when it was popular in its heyday. And it is now, I think, becoming increasingly clear that that's the mode of thinking that is operating, this whole pyramid of power, what I call the predator class. Just look at the Bill Gateses and the Bezos and the Faucis, different people who are, Fauci is one example that's in government, but most of them aren't even in positions of government, but they obviously clearly have they have wealth, but that's one aspect of it. But I don't think it is even just money. They have influence, they have connections, and they have power, and they are able to affect the world around us. And so that's technocracy, right? It deals very much with digital, like in our current time, digital technology. It's a part of the transhumanist agenda as well, which is, they promote it as like, we're going to create human 2.0, and we're going to be better and smarter and live longer using technology and just all these types of things, which again, there's some parts of me that are like, man, this is a really cool sci-fi movie come into existence. If we only had better people, involved in it, then maybe it would be something we could enjoy and be a different reality, but it doesn't seem to be the cards that we've been dealt. So their technocratic transhumanist philosophy is very much about taking what it means to be human. They seem to be people that do have a fear of death. We talked a little bit about death earlier. I think a lot of this is driven by these people are obsessed with not dying. And we know that these agendas have been going on for centuries, millennia, that they have long-term planning. And I think one of their goals has been to live forever and to make themselves immortal, if they haven't already figured that out some other way, maybe on a spiritual plane. But they seem to be driven by a fear of dying. And so that fear of dying is that, oh, well, death is a disease. We need to erase death. Why would we want to die? We need to create ways to live forever. That might be transport your consciousness into the metaverse, right? We're hearing more about that. And this is actually an interesting question, because I just released an article for the Last American Vagabond last week called The Great Narrative in the Metaverse. And it's a two-part article. The first one went into the Great Narrative, which is the sort of upcoming, the next phase of the World Economics Forum Great Reset agenda that they're calling the Great Narrative. And it very much ties into the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is essentially what we're talking about here, the push for driverless vehicles, autonomous robots, the Internet of Bodies, the Internet of Senses, all these kinds of things, this fourth industrial smart city technocratic future that is really just right on the cusp of where we are at the moment, and is pretty unnerving to just know, to not know which direction it's going to go. And so my article was looking at that, and the part 2 that I'll be working on this week is all about the metaverse. And the book that kind of outlined metaverse is a fiction book called Snow Crash, which I'm reading right now. It's pretty interesting. And these ideas have been around for a while, but it's essentially this concept that we should merge with the technology, and or we should give up our physical bodies and and use these virtual avatars instead, right? To live in the metaverse or whatever they're going to call it. And I'm sure we're going to hear propaganda right on the horizon that the metaverse is safer. There's no viruses in the metaverse. There's no climate change in the metaverse. You know, it's better for the planet if you just stay in the metaverse. There's a movie called Surrogates from like the last 10 years. It wasn't even really that popular. It had Bruce Willis in it, but I think it's worth watching because it's kind of the same thing. Theirs was like a mix of virtual and physical. It's like you laid in a machine and your consciousness went into this other physical being that you walked around being, but it was sort of a similar concept of just people didn't even live in their regular bodies anymore, right? So you have like a husband and wife living together, but they rarely interact because they're both in their avatars all the time living these other lives. I think that's what they would very much like to see happening. And part of that is about tapping into this consciousness. One of my biggest inspirations has been Native activist John Trudell. He died in 2015. I used his samples in some of my music, and I've put him in some of my videos and quote him in my books. He is an amazing speaker, John Trudell. I encourage anybody just to go look up his name and listening to his talks, specifically his Thanksgiving 1980 speech. Take Back the Earth, I think is what it's called. You'll find it. They should be on alternative platforms, but they're definitely on YouTube. And one of the things he spoke about years ago is that this predator energy is not only mining the planet for its resources, but they're mining our minds. They're attempting to mine our minds for our consciousness, to get in there, right? And he was calling it, you know, the what is it called, the machine age. You know, he was talking about technocracy and things, but I don't think he was maybe even aware of these terms, but he definitely could see what was happening. He was like, they're trying to create this machine age and merge us with machines and take away our humanness and take away our consciousness and disconnect us from the spirit, from the Mother Earth, right? And I 100% agree that is just, you know, he was calling this back in the 70s and 80s, and here we are, right? And it is becoming more and more clear. I mean, to the point that you've got Microsoft filing patents on how to mine cryptocurrency off people's body heat. You know, like, okay, they literally are trying to turn us into the Matrix battery. Like, I think we're in the Matrix prequel right now. And, you know, we can see where they would like it to go, where the human consciousness is either, you know, assimilated into one collective Borg where you lose your individuality, but everything's so great or whatever, sort of like a Brave New World type of thing, or where you still have your individual bodies, but maybe people don't even use them anymore, right? Imagine like you're laying down on your bed with your goggles or whatever it ends up being, and you're in the metaverse having your virtual world, but you are also connected to this Microsoft system that is mining crypto off of you while you're in the metaverse, and you get, you know, some meta tokens or whatever for it. And you're, yeah, cool, I got to buy a new skin for my avatar. Like, there's so many different ways they're going to use this to harness the power of our consciousness, you know, and of our being just in general. I mean, I think that's ultimately what it comes down to, is that they want to live forever. They want to encapsulate the spiritual aspect of us and see if they can contain it in something, you know, and to them that might be the metaverse, trap everybody in the metaverse, and then they can do what they want. But I do believe, and I have faith in the power of our consciousness and the power of like what we are, that we are bigger than anything they can dream up. Like, they have the tools and they've got the planning and they've got the $1 trillion budgets and all the propaganda machine, but they still can't erase that thing inside of us that says, like, I'm human, I'm going to fight, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to breathe, right? They're trying to condition that out of us, I think, with some of the younger generations, and they might be successful with some people. But I think ultimately, as we're seeing with COVID-1984, is that like people will fight back, people will push back. And sometimes, especially in the times we're headed, I think fighting back simply just means being a human being that is living free and being alive. Like, that's a resistance at this point in itself.
Yeah, man, you nailed it on so many levels. It's clear to me. And by the way, that movie Surrogate is phenomenal movie. I've been telling people to go watch that because it's like, that's where I see it going. It seems like, you know, they want to be gods on this earth, and they want the ultimate control system. And you know, we live in a time where our own sovereignty, our own birthright, is something to be, you know, it's a negative aspect. And so yeah, resistance is being human, and you know, we need to fight for that. Freedom is evolution, it's creation as well, and you know, we need to take that and maintain it as well. So as they, you know, are constantly coming down the pipe with perception management, which equals behavior control constantly, the simplest things is knowing yourself and knowing who you are and what you are, and activating that divine spark that we have. And that's where they're kind of fucking up, is because they're closing themselves off to that connection to source, to God. And by them doing that and having them just be completely ego driven, we have the advantage. It's just, are we going to activate it and use it? So
Yeah, and I would just want to add one thing to that too, is just because the previous conversation topic we were talking about was like death, right? And obviously like I said, I have faith and I believe in our capacity to overcome and to thrive in the face of everything that we are facing, which is pretty, massive. And I also, at the same time, know that whatever happens, if we give our lives in this fight or it just railroads us and there's no chance to resist in the physical realm, that I do believe that, as we were saying earlier, there is something much bigger than the physical realm, and that in maybe some level that we can't quite comprehend or really even put to words, but maybe can innately sort of know, that we will win, that like humanity and this struggle of light versus darkness, like, I don't know. I mean, maybe what they were trying to tell us in the Matrix about this isn't the first Matrix before, right? Maybe we've done this before, right? And we're just coming up to that climax moment of, all right, humanity, here's your test again. Can you rise above the darkness and, reach new heights? Or, oh, nope, let's try it again one more time. Let's stay in that samsara, that cycle of life and death, right? Yeah. I know that whether we succeed in the physical realm in the terms we might like we got the bad guys, accountability, free people, all that stuff, whether we live to see that or not, I do know that in the end, that righteousness and good will prevail.
Yes.
Yeah, man.
So there's so much I could go off on, but we got about 2 more questions for you and then we're going to let you go. But, I was involved in the health freedom movement out here in California since about 2016, 2017, started going out to rallies, things like that. And at the same time, I was studying Buddhism. I was going to a local Chan Buddhism, which is Zen Buddhism. It's like the Chinese version of Zen Buddhism. And, through Buddhism, the suffering is caused by your attachments. And what I saw through the activism was that, we were attached to the system, and the key was to detach from it. Our resisting it in the way that we were was okay, but it was also feeding it, and so I came up with the term detachment activism, right? Where, if we all pulled out of the healthcare system, right? If we all went to like the co-ops and the smaller, and just pulled out, same thing, pull out of the school system, the whole system would collapse, right? They need us. And so discovering your work, and your exit and build philosophy, basically the same concept. Why don't you talk a little bit about the exit and build philosophy?
Sure, man. Hey, by the way, have you put out videos on detachment activism? Because I swear I've heard that it's probably from something you put out. That's really cool. I like that name. Yeah. So exit and build is as you were saying, like to me, it just is kind of like a new way of encapsulating the agorist counter-economic ideas, which have been around since the 70s when Samuel Konkin III first kind of outlined them. I was introduced to agorism, counter-economics, and just generally this idea of, okay, opt out of the systems that don't align with your values, and in 2011, John Bush, who's one of the guys I work with, the Greater Reset and the Freedom Cell Network, he was giving a speech in Houston. There was a Federal Reserve rally. They used to have these all around the country in like 2010, 2011. And yeah, he was in Houston in 2011 speaking at the Houston Federal Reserve branch. And I was there kind of volunteering, but also just, taking in everything. I was still very fresh with all this. And he was sitting there pointing at the Federal Reserve and was just saying, like, people out there are putting all their energy into audit the Fed and, end the Fed. And it's like, the government's not going to end the Fed. They're not going to audit. And he just kind of said simply, like, if you want to stop the Fed, then stop using the Federal Reserve note. Like, find ways to not use their dollar, because we're just serving those systems. And that just like stuck in my brain, and I started to apply it in a holistic fashion and look at like every area. Okay, well, what about my personal relationships? What about, the way I make my money and where I spend my money, the type of food I eat and where I get that food from, all these different kind of aspects of our life and looking at them and seeing, are there other ways for me to opt out of these different systems, right? And then when I was writing my book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, which I wrote in 2019 and published in early 2020, I was trying to answer the question of, how does a free person stay free in the face of rising AI, facial recognition, and now vaccine passports and things like that? Because prior to COVID, the writing was already on the wall that this was the direction we were headed in. If anybody, for those of us who were paying attention, you could see like what was coming up. And so I was very much thinking like, okay, I'm the kind of person that I don't use bank accounts. I don't deal with the tax system. I try to stay out of these different systems as much as possible. And I think all of us practice that in different ways. We each have different sort of levels of comfort of how far we want to push and what we want to do. But generally, I think people, it's kind of like a natural human aversion to things that don't align with your values. Like, no, I don't want to hang out with those people. They're about those things, and that's not what I'm about. Oh, I don't want to shop at that store because they're doing, it's kind of, I think, not that difficult for people to understand because we sort of do it intuitively. But I encourage people to think about it like in a bigger context, like every aspect of your life. And that's when I started that phrase, the exit and build, kind of, that's where it came from in the book, just talking about that idea of, if you are in a situation where you're facing technocracy, you have a couple of options. I talk about holding down the fort, which is just simply staying where you are. You're going to fight the fight. You're going to build community there, get involved with activism, work with local people, and do what you can to hold it down. But if you're in a situation where you're like, hey, you know what, I've got no community in my local community, in my local area, or they're passing all these COVID measures, like I don't see anybody resisting, but I see this community over, the state over, the city over, the country over, and they're really doing good things. I'm going to exit from here and go build with them. I'm going to contribute my resources, my skills to that community. And that's the exit and build strategy. And I think that's what many, many people are now thinking about it. It's been really cool to kind of see that language getting used more and more in different circles, because I think people are recognizing that, whether they're talking about physically moving, because exit and build is like in the terms I was talking about, physically moving, but it's also just whether you hold down the fort or exit and build in terms of moving location, you can still exit and build philosophically from these other systems, right? You can hold down the fort in California, but still say, well, I'm going to exit from the banking system and contribute to the alternative currencies, crypto, precious metals, whatever you want to create. I'm going to pull my kids out of the school, my local school, but I'm going to build by contributing, working with local homeschooling families, unschooling, et cetera, right? So regardless of physical location, exit and build is something that people can apply regardless of, where they're at, and just by looking at their lives. And I'll just briefly mention one of my other books that I wrote that is downloadable for free on my website, just like How to Opt Out is at theconsciousresistance.com, is called The Holistic Self-Assessment. And I don't talk about this book too much, but I'm going to be putting more energy into it soon. I did a online course with the autonomy folks for it, for anybody who wants to check it out. But it's basically the process I took myself through when I went to prison. And that's where this whole idea comes from, is taking a holistic self-assessment, looking at your life, looking at your economy, your job, your food, your relationships, et cetera, go as deep as you want, and looking for inconsistencies. First, knowing, who am I? What are my principles? What are the values that I hold? And then, are my habits in line with those principles? Are my relationships in line with those principles, right? And just starting to do that work and getting to live in close as possible, very difficult in our modern world, but it is possible. Maybe to a greater degree than you are now, at least. And yeah, striving to kind of to correct those inconsistencies. That's a part of it, right? To me, it's like, once you do that holistic self-assessment, then you identify the areas where you're out of alignment, and then you figure out, how can I exit from those systems that I'm out of, that I'm currently using that do not align with my values, and go contribute to or create or build other systems, right? So that's pretty much what the focus is about.
That's fantastic, man. Yeah, it's something for people to keep in mind that, if we're trying to create a world of, true freedom, true anarchy, and a moral society, it's consciousness. It's a state of mind. You have to, it's cliche, you have to be the change, right? So, as I think, so I feel, so I act, is kind of the concept. So doing, Derrick's assessment, I think that's fantastic. That reminds me of a lot of, the mystery traditions, self-initiation processes that they do. It's something very similar. And, it works. and it's, you know, it's a good process getting something like that. So yeah, we're trying to reach a certain level of consciousness, and if we're attached to this system, this narcissistic system that's just draining our life force, it's just harder to create change, and ultimately creating more turmoil for the individual, but also for the aggregate, the collective of humans. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
cool, man.
Yeah, and it's, interesting how, the more they squeeze, and try to gain more control, the more it forces people to become self-sufficient. And it's like a natural process that happens. In preparing for this interview, I was looking over some of the Buddhism stuff that I have, and what you were just talking about kind of reminds me of the noble eightfold path. Like right action, right livelihood, like everything you're doing is in alignment with this ideal, that we're all trying to achieve. Um, Finally, we wanted you to tell us about your musical influences and how this new project, 33 Letters to Myself, has come to fruition.
Sure, man. Thank you for. I love talking about the music. I don't get to talk about it too much, as you might imagine. But I want to say to your last comment there, man. I definitely would say that there's surely some subconscious influences from Buddhism, because when I started meditating in prison, it was Zen Buddhism. Like that's what I first started learning. When I got out, I went to the Houston Zen Center, and I used to go there for years. So it's definitely like that was the path that I first kind of was initiated into meditation and the Eightfold Path. And I actually did a talk a few years ago called the Sevenfold Path of the Holistic Anarchist that kind of was based on similar concepts. But yeah, when it comes to music, man, musically, it's really interesting to me because I just like, I think most people, although I've met the odd person there who never listens to music. I'm like, what do you mean? You literally, there's no bands, nothing, you don't listen to music. Like I can't get through a day without putting on some kind of music in the background or something to listen to, right? But I grew up, listening to the radio, singing anything I could on the radio, and that was pop music, it was hip hop, whatever was on the radio. I would listen to it, right? Pre-internet, pre-download, whatever you want. And then, in fact, this is so crazy how quickly things change, because it's not even that long ago. But when I was in like 7th grade, which was like the late 90s, 97, 98, something like that, I ordered from like one of those catalogs, and just like get 10 CDs for a penny or whatever, right? And I had the catalog at my house, and I told my family, my parents, like, hey, order me some music. It's only cost a penny, whatever. Of course, it costs more. And I just went through the catalog and just like picked things that sounded interesting. I didn't really, they have like a name and like you got the CD cover and a little description. And I was just picking all kinds of music. And the first band that got me into what became like what I've always listened to, which is metal and punk, was Fear Factory. And ironically, like a lot of their messaging is all about man versus machine. A lot of it's like very much about what we're facing now. I think all that influenced me in ways that I probably can't even understand, just listening to that. But it was like the first time I really heard heavy music and music with a message, more importantly. That was like, wow, I don't know if I understand everything, but they're saying some real stuff here. And then, later discovering all kinds of other bands. But I pretty much from 14 till my mid to late 20s, like only listened to punk and only listened to metal. Used to be kind of a bonehead about it, like a lot of people in that scene, like, fuck everything else, it's punk and metal only. But I just, just like everything else, every year of my life, I've broadened my horizons over the years, and I like all kinds of music. I can definitely say the moment I really started to open up to other things was when I was addicted to crystal, and I was going through some crazy stuff, and I was taking lots of acid, started to open up to Pink Floyd, Bob Marley, all the old classics. And just like, I remember smoking a joint, listening to Bob Marley and being like, oh my God, I get this now. Holy crap, I get it. Like, this is so cool. And just having those different musical moments. And I feel like I'm influenced by all of that, right? And in more recent years, I really have come to listen to more hip hop. I can't really say that I listen to, I don't even know what's on the radio or what's popular. And as far as like mainstream hip hop goes, I like some conscious hip hop artists, but even that, I think some of it's a little too on the nose for me. Like sometimes it's just like too in your face, like the lyrics and the way they go about it. I like to be kind of more abstract. It's just not my style. So I mainly listen to just like instrumental, jazz hop, chill hop, like lo-fi, just stuff that when I'm writing, right? But because a lot of the hip hop, honestly, there's just, I like the beats, I like the instrumentals, but then I'm just like, shut up. Like when the lyrics come on, right? I'm just like, stop, or I can't listen to this, right? And there's I like all kinds. When it comes specifically to hip hop, I can listen to all types of instrumentals, like old school, kind of 90s sounding beats, and then more like trap or whatever. But I really, just for me, I'm kind of inspired just by life. I feel like when I get the inspiration to write a song, and I'm working on some new music now, um, it's just like whatever's happening in my life. It's not like I'm reading articles about the crazy things in the world and I want to write songs about it. In fact, I'm kind of trying to stray away from getting pigeonholed too soon as a conscious hip hop artist, right? Because if you listen to the lyrics, there's obviously, like, it's talking about everything we talked about today, like my journey and all this stuff. But I want to, I don't know, in the future, I might just want to write a love song, or I might want to write a song about just having a good day, cruising around your car and smoking weed, or I don't know, like I might just have different ideas, and I don't want to feel like I can't do that, right? Or I might later want to incorporate some of my, because I've always been a metal vocalist before this. I've been in a lot of bands, been, recorded albums, and was actually getting signed to a label when I got addicted to crystal, and they dropped us because we were all addicted to drugs back in 2005. They like, sorry guys, we have to let you go. So I've always done that, and I have that in me still. I love to scream, I love to growl, I love to write. I might want to incorporate some of that into my hip hop at some point. I just don't want to be boxed in any way when it comes musically, because I do listen to so much of, everything, anything. I'm really open to all kinds of music. And yeah, and that, as far as the inspiration to Letters to Myself, which is my first official EP under the name 33, it is very much inspired by like the first things I started to write for that happened right when my dad died from a drug overdose. And that's when I was 33 years old. That's why, one of the reasons why I called it 33. 36 now, turning 37 next week. And I was 33 when I had found out my dad died, and just a lot of things were happening at once. And I just had my PA, my speaker system in my room, and I just turned on some like random beats I found on YouTube or whatever, and just hit record on my phone and just set it in the room and just started like rapping and flowing for like 3 or 4 hours. And not a lot of it wasn't good. It was just whatever was coming out, and I'd mess up and I'd start again. I just was letting all this stuff out. It was just so much. And then I saved that recording and I went back and listened to it. And I was like, wow, there's some things that are pretty good in here that might be worth taking out and kind of turn into something more. And so that was sort of the beginning of it. And I've been working on it behind the scenes the last couple of years, not really showing anybody, but it was really 2021 going into this year that I was like, you know what, music is just, it's part of the soul for me, right? Like I said, listening to music, but also performing music. The band that I was in a couple of years ago, we went to the studio, we were about to release an album, and they had to let me go because I was just too busy doing this stuff. I wasn't really there. I was coming to practice once a month, and they were all tight knit friends, and I was the outside guy. And I was there for every practice, but they could tell my mind was, I'm like running for mayor, I'm writing books, I'm doing all this kind of stuff. Like I wasn't able to do that. So also doing hip hop allows me to just kind of do it on my own, right? I can just write my own songs. I work with different producers who send me beats or just kind of come up with ideas myself. And it's more like at my pace, my time. So it seems to be a better fit for my life at the moment.
Yeah, man, that's so cool to hear. John and I both have musical backgrounds in hip hop and stuff, and and yeah, and I tell this to people. It's like people ask me like, how do we reach the unconscious masses? And we create art, right? We don't need leaders per se. We need inspiration, and art. All forms of art can really do that, and music's one of them. It's been a huge influence in my life, and not everyone can do podcasts or write a book or something. You only the person can answer that question of how they can tap into their creative essence, whether it's painting or whatever, and then utilize that and harness that energy, and inspire. So it's awesome,
Absolutely.
man. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I'd love to check out what you guys have done.
Dude, for sure.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, it's funny. If you look at some old school Chill Will stuff, it's totally different than how he looks at the world now.
Oh man, yeah, different person back then for sure. And actually, I was 33 years old when I kind of went through my bottom out, and then came out of that 33, 34, and then I was just a different person. But I look back on that and I have no regrets. That's who I was then. I learned a lot about myself, But you know, there's some good flows on there.
I want to check it out, man. Send it over.
I'll send you a link. Bro.
It definitely becomes like a time capsule. You know, you listen to your old music. Like I have one, we released it in 98. We were called Potness Productions, and the album was called 420. And we got all this stuff on there about legalize it. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't work anymore. You know? But you know, I was listening to your album yesterday. It's really good. I'm big into lyrics, very good lyrics. And not to compare people, but I do tend to like say, like, you know, who you kind of remind me of. You kind of remind me a little bit of Zach De La Rocha from Rage Against the Machine.
That's not a bad comparison. I appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you guys for listening to it, man. I mean, it's just fun, man. Like I've been telling people, it was really cool to go on the activation tour. I've done speaking engagements before, but to be able to incorporate my music and have pretty much everywhere we went, people open to it. You know, there were some stops where I'm like, maybe I'm not going to perform my music tonight. Maybe the crowd, maybe they don't listen to hip hop, or, you know, you never know. Right. But people were very supportive, and I don't think I think hopefully people would be like, yeah, Derrick, just stick to journalism if it wasn't, you know, that great or whatever. But people have been really responsive, and it's been awesome to just kind of incorporate that into my work. And like I said, if it feels good to me, like you said, it was like, it's a time capsule, right? This is something I needed to put out about letters to myself. This was me connecting to my father's death and some of the things I was going through, as well as trying to connect to the old me and bring some of that message in, and, you know, and it was fun. And so now I'm just like, all right, that was my only original goal, is put this out. It's been in my head for 2 years, something called Letters to Myself. And then I'll see what I feel like after that. And in the last week or so, I've heard a couple new songs coming in my head. So I'll be hopefully putting out some new stuff at the beginning of the year, and by the Greater Reset, performing some music there too.
Awesome, man. That's fantastic, brother.
Last thing, why don't you just plug anything, where people can find you, what you got going on?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, brothers, again for having me on. And I hope I'll definitely share this out, and I hope everybody will continue to check out the great work you're doing. My work can be found predominantly at theconsciousresistance.com. You can go there. There's a books tab. The books that I mentioned can be found there, including the holistic self-assessment and how to opt out of the technocratic state. They can be both be downloaded there for free. And then there's a documentaries tab there if you want to see all the documentaries I've done over the years. And if you want to look at the Pyramid of Power specifically, thepyramidofpower.net is the website for that. A couple other links, I guess. I mentioned the Greater Reset, so thegreaterreset.org if anybody's interested in, you know, being a part of the movement that's trying to counter the Great Reset and offer, you know, solutions from the bottom up, real grassroots solutions, spiritual, mental, physical solutions. Yeah, and that's pretty much, I think, where I'll leave it, man. I appreciate you guys having me on today and giving me an opportunity to talk about these issues.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you, brother. And for the viewers, you know, you can go to onegreatworknetwork.com. John, myself, and of course, Derrick are on there as well. And, you know, thank you for your time and attention, man.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Derrick. Thank you, Will.
Thanks, brother.
And always remember, put something good in the air and plant something good in the earth. Peace.
We be the natural freedom league, cause we become no longer unvegan. We seek in the wisdom, and that's why we did come to this prison of prism. And that's why the beat thumps, and that's why we speak up. We be the natural freedom league, cause we become no longer unvegan. We seek in the wisdom, and that's why we did come to this prison of prism. And that's why the beat thumps, and that's why we